Welcome everybody to Association Exchange's March program. We're going to get started in just a minute.
The trickling has begun.
Yes. Feel free to pop your name in the chat and where you're coming from today.
Woohoo. I knew we would have people that were coming in from other locations. Look at this. Good morning from Austin. Hello, Dallas.
This is
Sunny
Florida.
Florida.
This is a silver lining of the pandemic is Association Exchange has gone nationwide. And it's really exciting to see so many people from all over.
Yes, in our chapter research, we found that geographical borders were replaced by time zones as the demarcation for whatever the organizational space was the chapter dealt with.
For sure, for sure.
A shout out to Michelle in Columbia, Maryland.
I've heard of the Columbia.
Yes, you have. And I just saw somebody come from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a big state. I'd love to know what part of Pennsylvania. We got a kiddo up in Mechanicsburg, works out of the capital there.
Oh, nice, nice.
Michigan. I love it.
California. Excellent. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to give it one more minute and then we'll kick off because we have a full program today for sure. Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania. Never heard of that.
That just sounds like the kind of place you would always have fun in, right? I mean, it's always got to be a special day.
That's right.
Oh. Snowy Denver. Oh, Laura, is at least the sun out? Another one from Chicago. Hi, Rebecca. Great.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. It's 12:03 time. I'm Jamie Bollier. I'm the Senior Vice President for Executive Education and CEO Programs with the American Bankers Association. I am pleased to welcome you to March's Association Exchange program. We appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule to join us today. We are a free virtual lunch group for the association community. And for those of you who attend in person, we also offer 1 CAE credit through ASAE. You are responsible for tracking and reporting those credits to ASAE. We will not be doing that for you, so keep that in mind. We welcome your comments and questions for our speakers today. You can place them in the chat box, please. We want to keep this as a very active conversation today. We'll have time at the end of the session to answer your questions. Our speakers are very interested in having a full discussion today and not just talking at you. And so today it is, we have a great program featuring both Peggy Hoffman and Peter Helstel of Mariner Management. They're going to discuss managing new volunteers. I'm going to turn the program over first to our March program coordinator, Diana Tucker. Diana is the COO of the Design Build Institute of America, and she's going to introduce our speakers today. So take it away, Diana.
Thank you, Jamie. Well, normally our speakers today don't need any introduction because for over 2 decades, they've been industry leaders in volunteer management and component relations management, and they've helped us in their thought leadership and guidance over this time. They've also supported ASAE in leading the research for the last 2 studies for the Research Foundation. So these are, Peggy and Peter are terrific experts and guides, and appreciate your time today. And one last thing, fun fact, Peggy also teaches those in spin classes in the pool. So it's not just today. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions about that too that we can follow up upon later. So with that, Peggy and Peter, welcome.
Oh, it
Thanks,
is. I
man.
love, yes, Jamie, Aqua Spin. I am super excited to be here. And as Peter said earlier, he's been voluntold, but he is also super excited to be here. As was just introduced, Mariner has really specialized in this conversation around volunteer management. And a lot of our work is done around how do we work with volunteers at the component level. But the latest research has really helped us, I would say, kind of expand or grow this idea of what is volunteerism in associations and what do we as associations have to do to really make that happen. So what Peter and I wanted to do today is to kind of lay a little bit of groundwork, or I should give us a framework for our conversation by sharing a little bit about what the research has told us, and then really open up to a conversation around this. And so to that end, let me go ahead and pull some slides up and get us started with some questions. And while I do that, Peter will distract the tech moves with a couple of words and a hello.
A couple of words and a hello, and I'm trying to be as distractful as I can, but I'm not quite sure I'm succeeding because it's taking much longer than I expected. There we go. Thank you, Peggy.
So let's get started with an initial question. Do you volunteer for a professional association? And by this, when I say a professional association, maybe it's ASAE, maybe it's MPI, it could be any association that represents sort of your own professional connections. If you do, as a volunteer, what's top of mind for you around creating a great volunteer experience around this particular research? So if you do volunteer, what do you need to know about or hear about in terms of what the research is saying? Association forum, love it. Former volunteer, that's a good, we should have a nice conversation on that one. Do I believe in the work? Yes. Great. Keep it coming. Keep it coming. Now, I want to bring the rest of the folks into the conversation with the second question, which is, do you work with volunteers? And if so, what's on your mind? So did you come today with a question related to how do I get this volunteer or volunteers to do, fill it in, right? So go ahead. I'm seeing some great questions here. Love getting all of these. So keep those questions coming in. Part of the reason for asking the questions is the research is really big and it's pretty deep. And so where do we want to go with this? It's got to be a lot based on what is it that you need out of this 45 minutes. So keeping these questions moving, let me jump in to sharing a little bit about what the research says. And I like to do the preface to say that I am going to be drawing largely from the research that comes out of the ASAE Research Foundation. In fact, there are really 4 research points we can look at when we talk about that. Back in 2008, we had the decision to volunteer. In 2017, we had the mutually beneficial volunteerism. Then in 2019 came the volunteering driver as part of the foresight works. And finally, in 2023, the report on the 2022 research around holistic approach to association volunteering. We're going to spend most of our focus time on that last piece, that last one. So that's this one right here. If I can get my laser pointer to work here. That's this one right here. And the reason why I want us to work on this one and focus on this one has a lot to do with the fact that that research was done essentially in the aftermath of COVID, meaning that we were asking about and looking at real-time happenings related to volunteerism in associations. So we were asking folks to actually do some comparison based on a pre-COVID and then a post or aftermath, let's call it, of COVID. So it is the most, I would say, substantive research that we can actually hang on to as we move into the new time. So top of mind, what do we need to know or remember or observe? What are the key things coming out of this research? First and foremost, everything we know about today's volunteer, their preferences, their expectations, we've actually been talking about since 2008. This research journey has confirmed the information we first heard about a preference for high impact, shorter term work that allowed folks to have more say and more involvement in the processes. We saw that in 2008, verified it in 2012, re-verified it in 2017, and reconfirmed it in this latest research. So it's not that we don't get it, it's that we haven't maybe activated our knowledge. And that's part of what this last piece of research does. The second thing is that volunteering is way bigger than the board, committees, and components that we think of. When we think about volunteering, and in fact, when a number of our volunteers think about volunteering, their eye is on the board, the committees, or a leadership role in one of your components. But yet, that is just one small slice, most visible maybe, but one small slice of what is volunteering. And a lot of what the struggles are with our volunteer systems today stems from the fact that we put energy and/or focus on those three without really understanding how we have to embrace the pool, create a deeper pool, and really structure this as a process to bring people through a member engagement funnel. In fact, that's an important thing for you to keep in mind. This is really a member engagement conversation. You know, we spent a lot of time, particularly a little bit before COVID, certainly during COVID, and absolutely since COVID, examining our member engagement, examining our membership models. Well, that's all going to extend. All of that conversation must now extend into how we are applying those things that we've learned or tried or know or discovered to our volunteering project. Now, the cool thing is the research said volunteering isn't dead. As a matter of fact, only 22% said over a 5-year period that was from 2017 to 2021 that they actually lost volunteers. 41% of the associations in this study reported an increase, and 37% said they were stable. What was also really cool is that 62% of the volunteers said they would actually recommend volunteering. It's not dead, but boy, it's changed. And the last thing is, I think it's useful for us, if we're going to get out of number 2, our mindset, is for us to think about kind of 3 types of volunteers. There's the ones who want to lend the hand. They're the ones that want to basically share subject matter expertise, which could be because they want to show what they know or boost their brand or even get a notch in their belt, right? The third are the ones that really want to create change in the profession, the trade, or the association. All 3 of these are valid types of volunteering. The question is, do we have the supports, the processes, the structure that really allows us to engage across that spectrum? It's really a continuum, right? So the research kind of gives us a little bit of this grounding for us to think about as we move into considering our volunteer system. But the research is also an incredible call to action. And the incredible call to action is, frankly, that it's a priority because it addresses the workload, it addresses the capacity of the organization, and it absolutely addresses the loyalty, the retention, and the growth of the membership. And so this particular, one of our CEOs that were on our research advisory council very clearly said, and allowed us to continue to put this up front, is that it must make a priority. And we just simply haven't done that in the association space. So how do we make this a priority? Well, as I said at the beginning, there's lots of parts to this research. In advance, we had a link to the research study. Boy, we could spend hours in taking apart all the really incredible elements of this particular research. However, the name of this particular conversation is around what do we do? And so what I want us to do now is to segue into what I would like to say are some practical steps. How can you take what we have learned, those 4 elements, respond to this call for action, and actually move forward in creating change in your volunteer system? It is, and I said this, I did recently led the ASAE, the final of their live workshops on managing volunteers. It was a virtual workshop, and in part of it, I said to folks, you know, we spent a lot of time where we've looked at our membership models, we've looked at how we deliver learning, we've looked at how we deliver community, we've actually changed how we communicate with folks, but we haven't really put the time and attention on volunteering. So here are some practical ways that I believe you can use the research. First of all, let's just start by making sure we're optimizing the experience for the volunteer and the staff. Even if you don't change anything else, you can at least go back and say, am I creating the best possible experience for the volunteer? And if I set up the staff that are working with the volunteer, like many of you, have I set you up for success, right? So just a couple of ideas. First of all, make sure you have a clear charge for any volunteer opportunity. And it has to be a charge that emphasizes outcomes, not something that says the membership committee will make sure that there is value in the membership, okay? That's too often what the charge says for membership. But let's get outcome-based, clear charges. Why? Because what volunteers told us is I want to be involved in something where we're making a difference, and I have to have clarity in order to keep me engaged. So just simply by taking this step of sharpening the charges, focusing on outcomes, we can actually drive volunteers into being more active. Next, use your time really wisely. Look rigorously at those agendas. Take out the stuff that is consent agenda. Take out the stuff that is simply reporting. Take out the stuff that is not going to move the needle on that outcome, right? Tap technology. Make it as simple and as seamless as possible. Have your whatever the volunteer needs available 24/7. Why this time thing? Because it connects to one of the top points of dissatisfaction. When volunteers said to us, why did you stop? Or why did you not say yes to begin with? It was because they were not certain, or they felt like you did not use their time wisely. You had them in meetings that didn't go anywhere. At the end of the year, you weren't sure what you got done. And I'm too busy as a volunteer to just to kind of join anything else. Third, train, 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 train. And I don't mean choo-choo. I mean really actually help your chairs, volunteer chairs, and your staff have the skills to facilitate conversations, to make sure that all voices are engaged, that there's really rich debate and deep discussion. It really is absolutely important that we take the time to invest in this particular skill, which is not necessarily a skill we spend a lot of time on. One of the things that Peter and I are going to be doing in concert with Christine Metter of Crystal Lake Partners is actually putting together a liaison training workshop in which we're going to talk about how do you facilitate conversations. Lowell Applebaum and Aaron Wolowick have a wonderful cohort that helps you with facilitation. ASAE has got a number of programs in their learning center. LinkedIn has got really good learning. There's lots of ways for you to train people how to facilitate conversations. But this connects specifically to the research point where volunteers said what drives satisfaction is the ability to feel like their voice is heard. They can have rich debate and discussion. They're not simply being asked to raise a hand to vote yay or nay. And finally, not the least for sure, is make sure that you build in reflection time. I'm using the word reflection. Out of the research, what was really the driving recommendation here was evaluation. If you don't know, if you don't know what you were shooting for and you don't measure to see if you've got it there, then you're just on a wheel, right? So really allow the time for the volunteers individually, collectively, the organization to evaluate, to reflect on what are we doing and evaluate the work to make sure that we can put in the right changes and innovations that make a difference. So it's really important that it's important that we start with the question, is the experience the best it can be? Is it moving the needle for the individual and for the organization? That gets the mutually beneficial concept that came out of the 2017 research. And if not, how do we fix that? And I'm going to suggest that these 4 points are a good starting point for you to answer that question. 2, optimize the structure. Now, really, I will tell you that what the research said, at least to me, more than anything, was you have to radically look at the structure from the standpoint of the question, how do we get the work done? Volunteerism, your volunteer strategy, is all about getting work done. Now, the work you're getting done actually comes from the question, why volunteers? And in fact, the key point out of this brand new research was you have to answer the question, why volunteers? Now, is this a tough question? I don't think it's terribly tough. I do think it's going to change. And part of this research in 22, which made it, I believe, so rich, was we had a cohort of 15 CEOs from a wide variety of associations. They had different whys, but just the act of answering this why allowed them to then go to the next question, which is, where do volunteers fit into the work of the organization? How do we best tap in to what they will bring to the work of this organization? With that answer, go back to your strategic plan and say, because this is where volunteers need to connect, go back to the strategic plan. What do we need in order to make this plan achieve the goals, achieve the vision of this plan? Then, and at that point, once we understand where we need to tap into our member volunteers, now we can begin to structure how we're going to pull them in. Now, in all of this, I'm going to say to you that low-hanging fruit is to target the committees as you're looking at structure. I mean, there's lots of places you could start on this, but we all have committees, am I right? And sometimes committees are really what's getting in the way of actually getting the work done. Maybe that's not exactly the kosher thing to say, but I'm just telling you right now that too often we've got standing committees sitting around, sitting around coming up with things to do. We're not yet making efficient use of their time or efficient use of staff time. We're not making efficient use of resources. And if the volunteers will be really honest, they're going to say to you, hey, is there a better way to use my time? In fact, again, a finding we saw in the research. People were saying it's really critical that you use my time wisely. Let me be part of something that is moving something forward, that is helping other folks, that is achieving outcomes. So if you start, a great way to start is asking, going back to that strategic plan, what do we need to make this happen? Okay, if that's the case, what skills do we need? What's the timeline? Now, does this look like a committee? Does this look like a task force? Does this look like a work group? Does this look like an ad hoc group? Now, all of a sudden, you can begin to optimize the structure to meet the needs of both the individuals and the organizations. Let me throw one more thing at you, and then I'm going to see what questions you have. Optimize the process. So, what does this mean? Well, I really think that there's 3 things that you can look at. The first, and in many ways, and I think Peter would agree with me, it begins with selection. It begins by really making sure that you're clear on what you need. This is where we start saying, this is not about filling seats. This is not about the political agreements. This is about what are the competencies, what are the skills needed? How do I then frame that in a job description? And how do I make sure as I'm looking at the selection process that I'm not dinging people by putting in requirements that are unrelated to being successful in the job? a common one that gets pointed to in this case is this notion of you have to have so many years in the profession, or you have to have a certain level of certification, or you have to be able to meet in person. The problem with all of these things is if those things are really necessary for the job, if it's an item writing committee related to certification, having that certification makes sense. If it is a membership value program, just because they have your certification does not mean that that's going to really help this group get where it needs to go. And years in the profession is a real problem for us as folks of my age start retiring out. If we start expecting a certain level of number of years, we may be missing some really important voices. So I'm not saying that these things don't count. I'm saying ask yourself rigorously as you're doing the selection process, what really counts? Secondly is in terms of recruitment, we have to nix the standard checklist of where are you in the organization? Where are you in the profession? What time have you put in? Oh, you've earned this. No, the recruitment needs to go out and say, wow, what are we specifically looking for in terms of these competencies? And how do we find them in our pool? How do we really create an opportunity for us to connect people to the roles that we have? And lastly, it's really about applying the right orientation and training. Earlier, I mentioned the 3 buckets, right? Lending hand, lending expertise, being part of the strategy, the change, right? Well, let's say someone wants to go from lending hand to subject matter expertise, or subject matter expertise to strategic leader. How do you help them get that way? That's where orientation and training comes in. Again, connects to a big ding from volunteers in that insufficient orientation and training was a big dissatisfier. Not only that, but in the research, this was an area where most associations chimed in and said, we're not doing a good enough job and we see what's happened. So orientation and training. Now, I've just given you these 3 different slides. You're going to have to, in your own organization, say, well, let me start with this. Maybe I start with a couple of committees that are older and I say, let's look at the charge. Maybe I simply start with taking before the next election cycle or the appointment cycle, I just go back and I look at the selection criteria and make sure it was open. Maybe you launch a volunteer pool and you try to get you try to look at how can I get new voices into my volunteer pool. Maybe you put in place a good orientation program. I know that, at some point, you're going to have to pick the place to start. You're going to have to hit the start button. A lot of folks, when we talk about the research, they come to us and they say, don't know where to get started. So let me just give you a couple of thoughts and then see what's still on your mind. A great place to start is with your strategic plan. If you've got something new in your strategic plan, a new initiative, rather than defaulting to, what committee does this go to? Say, what's the best way for us to do this? ISACA case study in the that we did in the engaging members chapter in the policies and procedures book is all about the fact that they had to look at their member value proposition and their member model. And they could have just gone to their membership committee, but decided to pull together a work group, 2 work groups, use the work group model to actually get them to a really cool place in their discussion, which then, of course, went back to the committee and back to the board. My point to this is that it opened up the way for a new way for them to approach decisions, discussions, new issues, new challenges, which they have fully embraced. Maybe, though, there's just something that's come in that's presented, like COVID was a great example. And the industrial hygienists were a perfect example of how they got together an ad hoc group that started creating in the moment and updating in the moment fact sheets for their members. they could have gone to the content committee or the education committee, but instead they said, no, let me pull together a group of thought leaders who can really help us get something out to our members as quickly as possible. So essentially, my recommendation is start with something that gives you an opportunity to test out some of this new models and research, and then go from there. I'm going to stop the share, bring Peter into this conversation. I think the most important thing, Peter, is that this is a big nut to chew as we look at all this research. What have you seen in chat in terms of questions, or what would you add to the slides? Which, by the way, folks, we will get that slide deck to you.
Yeah, Peggy. So I think we're seeing don't have enough volunteers, need more volunteers, need the volunteers that we have to do a better job. Lots of questions inside of the process by which we manage that whole conversation. I think this all goes back to how do we, and somebody said, how do we stop getting the same people over and over again? How do we deal with the familiarity versus competency problem? And I think this all goes back to the original point you made that this has to start with the strategic plan. It has to start with the why. And I think what we miss so often with volunteers is that the primary reason, the primary paycheck they're looking for is the why. You know, why am I doing this? And it's got to mean something to me, because I'm giving you my time, my energy, my passion, my expertise, whatever those things may be. And I need to feel like I'm making a difference. And that's a theme we heard consistently. And when we were doing the research and we were interviewed literally hundreds, maybe thousands of volunteers through the process, and that more than anything else makes the biggest difference. I think the other area that where people can make a big difference early on goes right back to the onboarding and orientation. First impressions are what it's all about, and the first impression that somebody gets when they step in the door can make a big difference in terms of how they continue to react beyond that. And there were lots of folks trying to figure out, how do we get people to really lean in. So I think those are key areas to focus the energy on. And then last but not least, the square peg round hole. I think Tony mentioned we have lots of volunteers. How do we get them to do the job? Or how do we get them to do the job well? And I guess the question I would then ask is, well, do they know what the job is? And do they care about that job, or did they just raise their hand because they were asked to raise their hand? And I think those are questions we all need to ask, not only the volunteers, but ask ourselves when we go back to the table and go, why do we have volunteers in the first place? Are we using human beings and the precious volunteer calories they're willing to give us in a way that is respectful of that contribution?
Yeah. So, and I want to point out, because you mentioned a couple of questions, and I do really appreciate the question that Melissa asked, which is, what can we ask of them that is meaningful? Which gets to the one that you just mentioned, Peter, about how do I get them to do things. I think that what we have seen, the organizations that rated that their volunteers were more effective, they actually, as Peter said, they do a really good job with orientation. Maybe not the training part, but they make sure they've got clarity around what is the job. But they also take the time to say, how will the volunteer know it's done? And then how can I help the volunteer understand the process by which we are going to, in fact, grade them, if you will. So what I mean by that in a practical way is a job description and having an orientation process where you don't sit here and read the job description. You send it to them, and then you say, I'd love to hear your questions, because I know that there's going to be something here that doesn't make sense. You open the door to get the clarification for what the job is. And then part of this is you say, our goal is that we're both getting out of this volunteer experience what we need. So build reflection time into it. One of the things that NIGP did was that they built in, and I just saw ASAE actually just did this, a mid-year check-in with volunteers where they say, hey, how's it going? Do you have what you need? Do you have any questions? That mid-year check-in does actually 3 things. First of all, it can be an opportunity for course correction to help people understand what the job is, right? 2, it lets you know if there are some problems brewing. And 3, it oftentimes is a kick in the seat for the volunteer to get them more engaged. So a simple thing like that, oh, I know it's an extra task for liaisons, but that kind of an activity is a check-in that helps us both help people stay attentive to the job as well as understand this meaningful thing. And as Melissa said, because if we can ask them to do something that is meaningful, then they will stay engaged. But meaning is in the eye of the beholder. So part of what we have to do is ask our members what is meaningful, right? We can do that in your onboarding program for a new member. You can do that in your onboarding program for a new volunteer. Ask them what is meaningful. That gives you some information. But I would say, secondly, is learn how to tell the stories. Tell the stories for what you're doing. Tell the stories for how this volunteer role made a difference. RAPS does a wonderful job, or at least a couple years ago was doing a really cool job where they would send out all the activities that the organization had done in a year that were heavy volunteer focused. Like we did this much education. We did this many articles in the journal. Being able to show then, this education led to this many more credentialed people. I mean, it's that kind of thing. Sometimes we actually have to tell them that it was meaningful and help them understand that.
If I could add, one of the other takeaways from the second round of research on holistic volunteer management systems was when we looked at the attitude that staff had towards their volunteers relative to the extent to which the organization made a concerted effort to provide good onboarding, training, development, support, et cetera, for the volunteers. And it's almost a tautology, right? I mean, if you care about something, you take care of it. And if you don't care about it, it dies. And I think this goes back to the first round of research we did, where we really focused on what we called mutual benefit. And I think that's where, if we forget mutual benefit, if we look at this from one side or the other, and we're not looking at it from both sides of the conversation, we tend to undervalue, the volunteers will undervalue the staff, or the staff will undervalue the volunteers. In either case, that's not a good situation. So I think that mutual care is equally important in terms of how we get the most out of our volunteers. And I think that's where that's a cultural attitude shift that needs to occur in a lot of organizations. And interestingly, we found that this is not just true of associations, but it's also true of the businesses for whom volunteers work. And you can walk into the business, and if the boss says, we are going to volunteer, everybody volunteers. If the boss says, well, if you're going to volunteer, it's going to be on your time, and I'm not going to support you at all, they're not going to volunteer very much, if at all. So there's a mindset, a cultural feeling there that is so important to keep in mind when we look at the mutual benefit.
So I know we've got just a couple, we can probably take just a couple of other questions we see in chat. So let me take a couple of highlight questions I saw. Kim asked the question, how do we not go back to the same volunteers every time? The answer is widen the pool. And there are lots of ways for you to widen the pool, but one of the ways to widen the pool is to stop using the word volunteer and start using words like get connected, get engaged, get involved, support the project that you get the most value out of it. It's using phrases that get people to raise their hand to help you, that puts them in a pool. And then you marry that with a volunteer profile sheet that allows them to say, hey, listen, if something comes up and it's short and it's sweet, or it's long and it's whatever, call me. Then now you're going to be able to do some very, a really cool, very what we call warm outreach as opposed to cold outreach. So Kim, think about how can you widen the pool. Linda asked about the bandwidth of volunteers and how just they get so, they just don't have the time. And I think the thing that we have seen, and this comes from talking to volunteers, the thing that we have seen is to whittle down the volunteer job. And I don't mean just in terms of if it's the board, you can't whittle it down. You can't whittle it down in terms of making it a micro job, obviously, but you can say, what are we asking of the board to do? Are we, if we're meeting every month, do we need to meet every month? Does the whole board need to meet every month, right? If we're having a meeting that right now we span over 2 or 3 days, how do we make it so we can use some pre-meeting time and bring that down to a tighter thing? If we need them to read reports, how are we putting in executive bullet points at the beginning to direct their attention? If we need them to respond to emails, how are we using the subject line to really get them to understand what is this action? Is this vote? Is this FYI? Is this keep it available for the board meeting? Use your subject line. So I think we help address those time constraints by us thinking through what do we need the volunteers to do. And the last one I think I would like to address, because I saw this a couple of times, is I'm a staff of 1, I'm a staff of 3. How in the world do I do all of these things? And I would say there's a couple of things you could do. One is to take the biggest pain point. And if the biggest pain point is you don't have the right people on the board, don't look at the board, look at the pool and work on the pool. If the biggest pain point is that you can't get them to do stuff, pick the one committee that has to get something done in the next 3 months and work your time there. The other thing to consider is you can get volunteers who can do part of it. So the NIGP Talent Council is an example. It's a council of all volunteers. They are really running the outreach part of bringing in new people. They do all of the intake on it. It's a completely volunteer ridden thing. So there are ways for you to be able to, I think do that. And then the
Peggy,
one
I would add,
yes.
I would add to that. I think that the real key across the board is to be really clear about expectations in the first place. And that really helps people understand where they need to focus. So you don't have to refocus them every time you get them together.
Mm-hmm. The final thing I will say is that, and this is just as my final word, which is yes, you can fire a volunteer. You have to do it very carefully, and you have to put in term limits. Firing and term limits help you move people through. And Valerie, my heart goes for you when you say they will not change the way they've been doing it for 100 years. I'm going to suggest find one project that they don't care about that is important, and try a new volunteer model for that one project. And sometimes we just have to sneak it around the corner. And with that, I'm back to you, Jamie. Thank you for letting us have this opportunity for a quick conversation on volunteerism.
Thank you so much, Peggy and Peter, for your insights today. I know I'm walking away with several good nuggets of information. Also want to thank Diana for pulling this session together. As Peggy noted, the recording and the slides will be posted on the Association Xchange website in a few days. I'm gonna just walk and chew gum here and pop that into the chat so you have the website. Also, everyone stay tuned for information on our April program. It's going to focus on ethics and AI. I know that's a topic that is near, dear, and extremely timely for us all. Thank you to everyone for joining us, and have a wonderful day.